the main pushback I get or we get is actually from vegans who call it greenwashing. And they're like, it's just another way that you meat eaters are pushing that you're better than us. And we don't believe it. And but it kind of makes me laugh because whose diet is all monoculture? Not us.
Back to my YouTube channel. I'm Jesslyn, and today I have Amy with me. Before we get started though, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself and say what your ranch is and what you guys do?
Sure. We're first generation ranchers. My husband and I, we both come from the yachting and maritime industries. We had a dream, I don't know, we've been together for 17 years. So maybe it's a 17-year-old dream that we would eventually raise beef, like raise grass-fed beef. And we made the dream a reality around about 4.5, 5 years ago. And we bought this ranch, and the whole goal was to do it regeneratively and do grass-fed beef. So it's we swapped yachts in the ocean for tractors and cow poop.
Awesome. And you're in Canada, correct?
We're in Canada. We're in British Columbia, about 5 hours inland from the coast. We're right on the US border. But I'm from Scotland and my husband is from New Zealand, and we picked Canada because it's halfway between the two.
And what's the name of your ranch? I don't know if I can say it correctly.
Waikikahei. So in New Zealand, where we would say the sticks or the boonies, they say Waikikahei, but it's spelled Mukau, but it's pronounced Mukau. So we kind of wanted that as a ranch name, but when we went to register it and get a domain, there's a ranch in Saskatchewan, which is a couple of provinces over, who's also run by a Kiwi, and they called it Waikikahei. So we couldn't have that. So we it's kind of like a play on our last name is Hay, Hay. So it's Waikikahei, and it loosely translates as tranquility over running water, and we have a lot of creeks through the property. But it's also Y, as in WHY, kick a hay. Why would you kick a hay? Waikikahei. It's just fun.
I love it. So why was regenerative farming or agriculture specifically important for you guys to do?
Well, we didn't really know anything about it. Our dream was grass-fed beef. My husband went to a clinic, like an educational clinic put on by the farming board. And it was run by a lady called Nicole Masters, and she's of Integrity Soils, New Zealand. She's amazing. And he went to this clinic and he was just like, wow, this is what we have to do. Like he was all ready to like spray weed killer and to start plowing up fields and to start haying and to like do all this stuff. And he went to this clinic and he came home and he was just like, oh my God, this is it. This is why we're here. And I'd never heard of it. Like I'd never heard of it. And he kept on going on and on about this. This was like 4.5 years ago. And he kept going on and on about how we had to do things regeneratively. And I was like, yes, dear. Okay, dear. Whatever, dear. Like you do your thing. And then the following year, we hosted a clinic. So we actually hosted a clinic here with Nicole Masters. So she came back for 3 days. And initially, I wasn't even going to attend. I'm like, I'm going to go and ride my horses. You go and do your thing. He's like, no, you have to come. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Okay. And I went and I was just blown away. From that point on, it was just like, yeah, this is what we have to do. We have to do everything regeneratively.
You guys started, and how you said you've had the ranch for 5 years now. Is that what you said?
Almost 5 years. Yeah.
And how has that been? Have you struggled? How are you guys in a good place right now? How's it been mentally, physically?
So maybe I'll take you back. So we lived on the coast, which is the coast of British Columbia in the lower mainland, and we had 6 acres. And on those 6 acres, we started our Wagyu herd. So we breed Wagyu as well as other breeds. So Wagyu, you're in Japan, so Kobe beef. We rented or leased 10-acre plots from other people, other farmers, and that would give them farm status. So we would get they would get a tax break. We got a free lease. And we started putting cows around other properties. And that's how we started. So we went to the auction and we bought recipients. We went to the auction and bought cows that were going to end up in slaughter. And we brought them to the ranch and we bought Wagyu embryos with bloodlines from Japan. And we put embryos into these recipients. And that's how we initially started the herd. So we moved here with our bull, a couple of steers, a heifer, and then our recipients. And that's all we had. And there was nothing here. Like this place had never, I don't think you're meant to say, but it's over 500 acres, and it had never been farmed for like 50 years. Like people would hate it, but that was it. Like no one had lived here. It was a holiday place. They had built this log house, and the farm, no one had ever farmed. So we came here with all these ideas that we were gonna plow and grow hay and do all this stuff. And we learned the hard way that no, we're not going to do that. But as soon as we got onto the regenerative side of things, we didn't have to, because we use the cows as our fertilizer and as our tools, and they just the nature of being a cow, they put carbon and nitrogen into the soil. So we would densely graze our 13 cows in these small areas and just move them around. But then we got more cows. Like we're running a herd now of over 300, and they're our biggest tools. Like they literally make our grass greener, and they make our soils more nutrient dense. And yeah, it's kind of amazing. But when you get, it just kind of blows your mind, and you just end up down the rabbit hole. There's so much to know. I don't know half of it. I don't even know a fraction of it, but always learning.
Yeah. And when you do first start to learn about it and it clicks, you're like, oh, this makes so much sense. Why did I not connect these dots sooner? But do you want to kind of give a really brief overview of kind of what regenerative agriculture is for people who may not know if they're watching?
I'm going to bring up the tenets because I always forget them. So, and basically it's, you nourish the soil with what you do want. You don't kill what you don't want. So basics are that, read your weeds. So if you have weeds in your field, instead of going, I must kill that, it's like, well, what is that weed telling me? What is that weed telling me about a soil? Like, for example, if you have lots of dandelions and people think weed killer, I must get rid of dandelions. But then if you think about a dandelion, it has a very long taproot that goes down through all the layers of soil, bringing up nutrients from down below, because your upper levels of soil are nutrient deficient. So a dandelion is actually helping you. It's saying your soil isn't good and I'm helping you. I'm bringing things down from down below up above so more things can grow. So once that soil becomes nutrient dense, soil goes, woohoo, I'm here. Dandelions go away and they'll die off and something else will grow. And it's kind of, I mean, that's going to be a long cycle, but that's basically what the weeds are telling you. So there's things like clovers and buttercups and hoary alyssum, which hoary alyssum, it indicates dry, sandy soil and disturbed soil. And but people hate it. It's very toxic to horses. So they plow and they get rid of it, which actually makes it a better environment. So it grows back more. Whereas if they just made your soil wet and more nutrient dense, it'll die off because it hates that. It wants dry and awful soil. It's just kind of like reading your weeds and kind of nourishing the soils of what you do want to grow, because that makes it an inhospitable place for what you don't want to grow. Mm-hmm. So that's very basic, but there's tenets. Number one is don't disturb the soil. So that means you don't till. So no tilling, no plowing, no drilling, nothing. So when we seed, we don't plow or disturb the soil. We need to protect our precious topsoil. And every time we disturb the soil, we are at risk for more and more weeds, which means many resort to more and more pesticides, and this will kill the soil. So number one is do not disturb your soil. Number two is keep the soil covered at all times. So when you see farms that have they've had a great crop and they've harvested the crop and then they plow the fields and the fields are bare, you wouldn't do that in regenerative agriculture. You would plant a cover crop. So you would never have bare soil, which is twofold. If you have a healthy root base, your soil holds more water. So if there's a heavy flood or if there is high wind, you don't lose that topsoil. Because there's a big root base and root bowl and everything is very compact and it doesn't disappear. So keep the soil covered. This goes hand in hand with point one of do not disturb the soil. If we keep the soil covered by different plants and root structures, it protects it from the sun, from heavy frost, and also increases the water retention, great in a drought. I'm just reading these off our website. This is what I have on our website. Number three is keep living roots in the soil, which is what I was saying about you always want good coverage. So keep living roots in the soil. Root action feeds our soils and provides a diverse food system. Soil is alive and needs to eat and drink just as we do. We cannot survive in a desert and neither can our soil. And living roots provide great water holding capacity. Number four, diversity. This means no monoculture. So a monoculture is like your corns or your wheat or your maize or your rice. It's like one crop per field, which is awful for our soils because they deplete the nitrogen and they deplete the nutrients, and then we have to put on more chemical nitrogen, and soil goes, woohoo, I have loads of nitrogen, I can switch off now. You grow your crop, and then your soils are dead, and you put on more nitrogen. It's like this vicious circle. So diversity, this means no monocultures. Diversity supports the whole ecosystem and works with nature, encouraging wildlife and pollination and more. Monocultures are very extreme, do not support a thriving ecosystem. And one of the most important ones is number 5, livestock. So regenerative agriculture uses livestock action. So if you think about a cow's hoof, it's like 2 parts like this. And when they walk, they squelch and separate their hoof, and it pushes all their organic matter, so their pee and their poop, into the soil, which stops you having to plow or drill because they are naturally disturbing it as much as they can. So livestock, bring back ranging animals. Livestock provide important nutrients in the form of nitrogen and carbon. Their hooves aerate the soils and spread their organic matter. They're amazing weed control and help clean the air and prevent wildfires.
Yeah, and it does seem like these were obviously things that we were doing before technology and all of these new weed killers and convenience. So why do you think that is convenience the reason that we got away from this in the first place? Because this isn't new information, you know what I'm saying? But we just have forgotten it. So why do you think we forgot it as a society?
There's so many different theories, but a lot of it was after World War II when everything was being rationed, or even during World War II when we had to feed troops. They wanted things to be fast and to grow fast and to ship everything out. So a lot more chemicals were involved, a lot more kind of to increase yields. They started feedlots, like feedlots or a CAFO. I've only been around for like 70, 80 years. Like it's pretty new in terms of agriculture. I think you would call what we do now modern and what we do traditional. Like we don't focus on any of that. I mean, you don't want to alienate farms and ranches who do use more of a modern technology, because that's what's out there. That's what you get funding for. That's what big ag will push. You have to grow heavy yields to get your quota, and everything is geared towards modern agriculture. And it's like, you don't want to alienate that. It's more that you want to educate people in, well, that's great, but there is another alternative, like experiment, start small, take a field, you don't have to give one up for the other, like meet in the middle. But I'm sure I'll get shot, but it's kind of like, who wins? Like, what is the industry that wins with modern agriculture? It's big ag. It's all the heavy fertilizer companies and the heavy industry, like machinery, tractors, plows, diesel, time. Like I think there's the movie Kiss the Ground, has some great stats in it that if farmers in the USA, so it's not global, but they take the states, embrace regenerative agricultural practices, they would save $100 billion per year. So who loses $100 billion per year if you embrace regenerative agriculture? So yeah, I think, I don't know, that you should start small, and we kind of have to slowly migrate back to how things were, but take the advancements we've made that actually have made things better and stick with them. But the way we're going is not sustainable.
So have you received any pushback from activists or anything? Do you think that people are just unaware of regenerative agriculture, or do you think people are actually against regenerative agriculture? Like, why is this not getting more popular?
I think it is getting more popular. Like you have like Will Harris of White Oak Pastures, and you have Polyface Farm, and you have Alan Savory, who is massive with the Savory Institute. There's now big organizations in Europe and Canada. Like it is growing. The main pushback we get is actually from vegans who call it greenwashing, and they're like, it's just another way that you meat eaters are pushing that you're better than us, and we don't believe it. But it kind of makes me laugh, because whose diet is all monoculture? Not us. But that is the biggest pushback, is mainly vegans. And then there's the odd, like, I guess I can't name names, but like lobbyists for big ag. So lobbyists who say there's nothing wrong with feedlots, and lobbyists who say that you need fertilizer, and lobbyists who say that monocultures are the best because they're paid by big ag. So there's a little bit of that. But I think the regenerative agriculture movement is growing a lot, for sure.
If you don't mind, I want to pose some devil's advocate type questions to you of
Sure.
things that we get all the time in the meat eating community, and I'm sure you get all the time too. So, mention so you did mention monocropping, and one thing that I always hear is that, well, most of the monocropping goes to feeding the cattle, so they're contributing to climate change with their burps and their farts, and then all the monocropping is going to feed them, so it's all the cow's fault basically. So how do you respond when people say that, or people come at you with that?
Oh, there's so much in that question that I think you have to kind of pull it all apart, like pull each part out separately. So something we get a lot is that cows are ruining the planet. I mean, there's a few things there. There's, I think, globally livestock. So that's not even just cows, but livestock only contributes something like 5.2% globally, and that was a World in Data I think is the.
If you Google it though, it says 14.5% world greenhouse gas emissions. So that's always that people go to Google and they'll see that 14.5.
Diana Rogers of Sustainable Dish actually, she addressed that. So she said that, so where do all these exaggerated methane claims against cattle come from? Why does the Meatless Mondays campaign have memes saying that livestock production causes GHG emissions more than the entire transport sector? So there was this study in 2006 where it said that 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions were from livestock. But the number, and this is the number that is still circulated by the media and is on Google, but this guy, Frank Mitloner, analyzed how the data was gathered, and he found there was this huge error in that they were doing the full cradle to grave life cycle of livestock. So they were factoring in everything: feed, transport, processing, the works. Whereas they didn't do the same for the transport sector. It was just like a snapshot in time. So they weren't comparing apples for apples. So when they actually did the same comparison, and that's what the World in Data, and I think there's a link on our website for that. Globally, livestock is only like 5.2%. I think in the States it's like 3.2, and in Canada it's like 2.6, and that's livestock. So it's just, and they're part of the biogenic carbon cycle. So they don't actually introduce anything into the atmosphere that's not already there. It's like this 10-year cycle. Like if you do photosynthesis in high school or grade school, whatever, you learn about it. Like plants take in carbon, they give off oxygen, that's photosynthesis. The cow eats the plants, digests the carbon. They burp CH4, methane, that goes up into the atmosphere. It meets up with oxygen again. So you get carbon dioxide and H2O, water falls, plants bring in, and it's just this cycle that goes on that takes 10 years. And it drives me insane when like you get these keyboard warriors that are just like, but cows are killing the planet. It's like, no, they're totally not. They're really not.
And I love the retorts of, it's just the facts. The cows are killing the planet. Just read it. Google says. It's like, okay. Yeah. Once you learn about it too, it's one of those things where it makes sense, and it's like, oh, so nature knows what it's doing. Wow. Big surprise. Yeah.
Nature does everything better than we can.
Okay, so and then so back to that question, because we did I took you
on sorry, yeah. There was so many parts to the question.
Multidimensional.
So the other bit was about how most of the monocrops that are grown are for cattle, like their food, wasn't it? Like, so I think, well, we don't feed any of that because we're grass fed, but cattle, they eat a lot of byproducts from corn and from soy and from grain and barley. Like they eat a lot of things that it's taken away, made into food, and they eat what's left over. So I think that there's a lot left over that we don't eat. So they eat it, so it looks like they eat more, but it's also they don't need the grain. Like, again, I don't want to alienate farmers and ranchers who are doing an amazing job, and they do feed grain, because we don't want to stop people eating meat. Like, eat beef, eat meat. There's so many different levels. That the first level is don't stop eating beef, eat whatever beef you can. If it's cheap beef from the feedlot, I don't care, eat beef, just eat beef. But kind of fix that problem, then we can maybe look at all the rest. And there is data that says that out of all agricultural land, only a third is arable. So there's 2/3 of agriculture land out there that's too rocky, too hilly, too arid, that nothing would grow anyway. But grasses grow, and you can put livestock on them and they would eat the grasses. And there's enough unused agricultural lands that would feed all the animals that are currently in a feedlot. But then we get the people that go, well, that's not practical. But it's like, well, why isn't it? Like we've had ranging, it's called managed grazing. You would just have to work to do the managed grazing instead of working to grow these crops for cattle. Like it's just a different choose your hard. It's either hard to feed grain or it's hard to do managed grazing. Choose your hard, like choose which one is better for everyone. But I think that's a secondary factor. Like I think the first factor is eat beef, eat lamb, eat pork. I don't care, just eat it. And then we'll fix that next.
Another big argument that I always hear is that it takes, almost 2,000 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of ground beef. So it's just a huge waste of water, which is also just ruining the planet. So how do you respond to that?
So, I mean, I get a lot of my data from Diana Rogers, who is amazing. She has the Sustainable Dish page and podcast, and she wrote the book Sacred Cow. She has done the research, and for conventional cattle, which is your grain finished, they take 93% of the water is rainwater. Even though they end up in a feedlot and they may be irrigated, that's where that 7% comes in. Or maybe they're in the middle of Phoenix, Arizona, where there's not a huge amount of rain. So that's where that stat, like it's national average. So 93% of the water that is fed that cows drink is rain. For a grass-fed and finished cow, it's 97% of the water they need is rain. Whereas a pound of rice is something like, I think, 400,000 gallons or whatever. It's like double the amount of a cow, but it's not rainwater. I think only a fraction is. It's mainly from precious water reserves. And so that one, it's just crazy. Like I think I did a post about that, and that post, like I got attacked by so many people going, this is wrong. And I'm like, well, is it wrong? And it's like, people don't understand data. Like I'm not saying 100%, I'm saying 93%. And they're like, well, what if you're in Texas? It's like, well, that's where that 7% comes from. It's a national average. So you got to take into account a cow from Seattle, where it never friggin' stops raining, a cow from Phoenix. Like it's an average. People just don't do maths very well.
An argument that I hear a lot from people who do eat meat is that there's no difference between grass-fed and grain-fed beef. So how do you feel about that? Do you just support, like you were saying before, just eat meat, whatever meat you can, or do you feel that there is actually a difference between grass and grain fed?
I'm from Scotland, and we don't have feedlots in Scotland. Everything is just grass fed, or no, I wouldn't say grass fed. It's grain free. So in the winter, cattle are turned out into big fields and they eat turnips and brassicas and haylage and silage, and they don't get a lot, if any, grain. When I moved to Canada and we halved a quarter with some friends of ours, and I ate the beef, I'm like, this is the worst beef I've ever had in my life. Like this is just bad. Like let's go and get some lamb. It was just tasteless. Like I didn't like it. And now, I mean, this was 13 years ago, and now I know that there's a difference. I think there's like 3 different types. So you can have a cow that is 100% grass fed and finished, so it spends its whole life in pasture. It eats hay and haylage and grazes, shrubs, plants, leaves, everything. You get a cow that is pasture raised and it gets a grain supplement. So it never leaves home. It's there its whole life. It eats grass, hay, haylage, gets a grain supplement to help it put on weight. And that's like in the middle. And then you get grain finished, which is probably ends up in a feedlot, and they get fed a mixture of hay, haylage, and lots of grain like soy, corn, grains, whatever, to put on the weight at the end. So there's the grain finished. They're probably finishing at 18 months of age, whereas your grass finished is closer to 3 years. So there's a difference there. And some people say there's no difference. I think in studies they found that there isn't a huge amount of difference. Proteins may be slightly better, but that might be breed specific, that there's not enough data to actually know. The fat is different. So if you were to put in your, like if you track macros and you put in like your macro calculator, grass-fed is lower in fats. But we're also learning from a carnivore diet-based thing that fats are good. And we need those high animal fats. Like fat doesn't make you fat. So I don't think one's worse than the other. I have just learned today, one of my neighbors has a podcast too, and she does a lot of studies, and she's very into permaculture and into organics and into grass-fed. And she was doing a tutorial for her viewers on bone broth. And she found a study that, I'm going to read it because I can't remember. A researcher, Stephanie Seneff, found that when gelatin, bone broth, or collagen is made from animals fed conventional on GMO corn or soy, the glyphosate substitutes for glycine in their protein and collagen. So glyphosate replaces glycine in the cow's body. When it is made into broth or gelatin, then the error continues, and it would do the same to us. So that glyphosate will substitute glycine in our own collagen and bones and skin, which affects our joint muscles, causing injury, pain, and tears. I thought, well, that's kind of amazing, because so many people have a glyphosate intolerance and they get autoimmune and they get aches and pains, that I want to go and study that a bit more. I mean, it's the first I heard of it this morning, but it kind of makes sense. So I think there is a difference, but we're just learning about it. But then is that grass and grain, or is that GMO monocrop? And
interesting.
We could still feed grain. Like you could, if you want the grain flavor, you could absolutely feed grain, but do it in a regenerative fashion. So plant a cover crop. Don't do a monocrop. Like there's nothing wrong with them eating barley and corn and things, as long as it's not a monocrop and it's not a GMO.
And so you did touch on the grain is fatter than the grass fed. So how, with your cows, how do you get them fat enough? Like how do you fatten them up on just the grass?
By increasing the nutrient density of our soil. It's full circle. So nutrient dense soil produces nutrient dense grasses, which produce nutrient dense meat. So we feed them things like alfalfa, which is high protein feed. We feed them things like thistles. So a thistle, the seed head, has as much protein as alfalfa, which is a legume really, but all the different grasses they eat packs on the weight. So we do, and when you do haylage, which is a wrapped bale, if you've seen like the big field marshmallows when you're driving around, so those big wrapped bales are haylage, and that increases the sugar content of that hay. So by giving them different hays like triticale, timothy, orchard, alfalfa, all these different grasses have a different protein content, and they naturally put on weight, but it just takes longer. And you can actually tell when you look. A lot of people say grass-fed is yellow. Our fat isn't yellow, it's white. But what we find is grass-fed often has more marbling and less fat cap. So they're not as fat because they haven't had the grain packed on quickly. So they don't have that huge fat cap, but they have more marbling. Whereas sometimes when like the kids are doing 4-H and you see the carcasses, they have a huge fat cap, but not a lot of marbling because they haven't grown enough. That makes sense?
Yeah, because you said yours are 3 years old versus 18 months old. So
yeah,
I feel like this has been so amazing. I've learned so much from you too that I didn't know.
And I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. Like I am still learning every day.
Yeah, I mean, and we all are too. And it's important that we share this information and get it out too, because I think it's interesting with like you can't speak about something unless you're an expert. It's like, but the expert had to learn, you know. Mm-hmm. So like we all have to go through that. And we all have to learn and like share. And if you get something wrong, like you get something wrong and you learn about it, and So we're love
living it. Like we're living it and practicing it and doing it. And like, I mean, I'm a former vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for legit, but it was more because I didn't like how animals destined for our plates were treated. Like I didn't like the whole concept of a factory farm. So I mean, like I'm from Scotland, as I said. If my dad had shot a pheasant, I'd eat that, but I wouldn't eat chicken because it didn't have a good life. So it was, I mean, I was a lot younger, but it was like, it's not fair. Whereas now I honestly feel that any animal destined for our plate deserves to live the best life they can. I don't think it's their death that counts. I mean, obviously it counts, but it's their life that counts. Like they have to live a good life. And from a regenerative standpoint, I know that steer that I have raised during his life, even though I'm really sad when they go, like sorting day, I cry. Like every month I cry. I don't think you ever get used to it. But I know then I can make peace because that sphere in his life has protected all the houses around here from fire because they provide fire protection because they eat the flammable underbrush all through the range, and we get a lot of fires. He has nourished the soil. He has protected delicate ecosystems. They have done so much in their life just by being allowed to be a cow. And then that's my argument to when we get those vegan warriors that are like, but no animal died to feed me, and I'm like, what? Excuse me. How many didn't die to feed you? Like, let me see, hummingbirds and bees and worms and foxes and rabbits and rodents. And in the UK, we have no predators, none. So we have a deer population that is overrun, and people get hired to shoot them. That's what they do. They go out and kill them all. Some get eaten, some don't. And it's like, so to protect your food, all this stuff has died. They've been shot, they've been trapped, they've been poisoned. And then there's the ones that are just caught in the crossfire, your bees and insects and hummingbirds and owls and foxes and things. And it's like, well, so all of that died for you? It's like, it gets down to intent. Like, just because you don't intend it to happen, does that make it okay? And they're like, I had this argument this week with this guy going, intent doesn't matter. And I'm like, it does matter. Like, even though you don't intend for it to die, it still dies. So how are you better than me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Tangent.
No, you're fine. And you bring up a good point too, because they are getting fed through monocropping, which is depleting the soil and killing these animals. So then you have to plant more monocrops so that they can eat enough food to get the nutrients they need. So then you need to kill more animals and plant more crops, that depletes more soil. When you break it down, in my opinion, meat eaters, especially regenerative agriculture, the regenerative agriculture sphere is more vegan than vegans.
Yeah. A grass-fed steak is more vegan than vegans.
Yeah. And you did also bring up a good point that I do want to ask you about, is how do you respond to people who say that you're torturing these animals, you don't love these animals, you're just raising them to kill them?
I love them. I totally love them. That I do. I say that, again, the whole thing about that I am at peace with that. But I said, like, I think I did a post the other day going, how dare you say that we don't care, we don't protect them, when we protect them every minute of every day. We protect them from drought, we protect them from famine, we protect them from disease, we protect them from predators, we protect them from everything. And it's not like, say we have 300 cows or something here, only a third are meat. Like, it's not like they're all meat. There's always like your feeder stock, which will end up as meat. There's your breeding stock, which will never end up as meat. And they're all named and they come for scratches and they love you. And then there's like your yearlings and growing. They might end up as meat, or they might end up as the feeder, as breeding stock. And then that often brings in, but you rape your animals. And then it's like, oh my God, like, if you see a horny cow, like they're worse than teenagers. Like, like no, there is no rape involved. And even AI, it's so gentle. Like, they just stand there. Like, there's no pain. And yeah, the bulls are very happy and the cows are very happy because they get their itch scratched, and cows get very horny.
Yeah, and that too, it doesn't make sense once you start to poke holes in it too. What are you suggesting? What's the alternative here? You want us to just let them go into the wild? Like, you think that they're going to have a better life in the wild without humans caring for them? And there is that balance of, we take care of them, they take care of us. And that's just the circle of life. And I feel like that is a hard thing for a lot of vegans to wrap their head around. And I think that is one thing that type of person is drawn to veganism, that can't come to terms with death, and everyone dies. And that is a fact of life, even down to what's in the soil, the bacteria and stuff in the soil, like they're eating other things too. Every single aspect of life has one thing eats another, and it creates life, and death happens. And I think that's really hard for some people.
They don't get it. No.
Yeah.
They're so far removed from where their food comes from that they just don't even, or far removed from nature. Like, they live in cities and they don't see life and death. And I'm really bad that if I have a vegan that is just on our page, I tag them in posts on Nature is Metal. Are you on that? It's one of my favorite. And I tag them in these horrific ones with like tigers eating mama monkeys with the baby still attached, or hippos being born and being snatched up straight away. And it's like, nature is violent, nature is vicious. You can't say cruel because that implies intent. There's no intent there. It's just, I eat you to live. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, and they don't get that. Like, they don't get that coyotes aren't kind. Like, we had a cow that got cast last winter. Cast is when they fall over and they can't get up. They're the wrong way down a field and their rumen gets blocked and then they bloat and they can't get up. You have to roll them and then they literally burp all that methane, but they can't get up. And we went out in the morning and she'd been eaten from the back end, but she was still alive. But she, like, they call it a death by 1,000 bites is death by coyote. And yeah, we went up to the house and got a gun and put her out of her pain. But it's violent. Like, coyotes don't care. They don't care at all. Like, they have to eat and feed their young and their cute little puppies. There's so many pages and there's so many, like, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was a former vegan who says that she can't even have babies now. Like, she's ruined her whole body for being vegan for so long. And, you know, she has is it polycystic ovary syndrome or whatever, and all kinds of like B12 deficiency, and she was losing her hair and she could hardly walk, and it was like, because she was a vegan. And she's now, I think she has a book, is it The Truth About Plants, or I'll have to have a look, but I want to go and buy her book. But she was like, it almost killed me, and I thought it was the best thing for my health, and every time I felt worse I dialed it in even more and just ate more vegetables and more whatever. And it's like, yeah, you can't. I mean, there's what they say, something like 83% of vegans fail. Like, they turn back to eating meat again.
Is that the vegetarian myth? Because that person who wrote that book kind of has a similar story too.
Maybe it might be that one.
That one's a really, really good book too. That's the what opened my eyes to there's no such thing as veganism.
I think if it is the one, she goes on about how she tried to grow lettuce and the slugs kept eating her lettuce, but she couldn't bring herself. Okay, it is. She couldn't bring herself to kill the slugs because then she's killing slugs to eat her lettuce. So she would go and buy lettuce, and she goes, but they kill the slugs in my bought lettuce. I'm going to have to grow my own. And it was just like, yeah, this just doesn't work.
So do you have any final advice if someone is wanting to start a ranch or start regenerative agriculture, get into the life? What's your advice?
I would say, like, if you are a ranch owner and you want to move to something, or you want to move to a regenerative method, I would say, if you're scared to make that leap, start small. Like, take an acre and experiment and see how it works. And then as you get braver, expand on that. If you have your own garden and you want to grow, like, even your lawn, like, look into what you can do to kill weeds naturally in your lawn instead of using Roundup, which is deficit. Like, there's so many things out there. It's just our first gut reaction is to just reach for something off the shelf, as opposed to looking into, what is this trying to tell me? Like, we're so good at killing the symptom and not finding the problem. And it's the same with our health. It's the same with our soils. So it would be, start small. There's some amazing books. I would look up the Alan Savory books, Holistic Management. I would look up Nicole Masters. She's amazing. Her book is called For the Love of Soil. Diana Rogers, her book is great for kind of all aspects. It's called Sacred Cow, The Case for Better Meat. So it actually goes into why we need livestock. And just kind of, just start. If you're scared, start small, but look into it and you'll save yourself money. Like, you really will. It's crazy, but you will. But taking that leap is hard.
Well, thank you again, Amy, for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you.